were 35 books, and I think the hardest is to try to do justice to each book on its own terms, not to bring some superior or overarching standard to which you subject the books, but to get into each book and to look at what it is trying to achieve and to be attentive to what it's trying to achieve. I was looking for a book that really pulled you in, a book that whether through narrative or through ideas or a combination of them or even style. I mean, there's one book, Ivan Vladislavich's Portrait with Keys, Joburg and what, which is one of the most stylistically refined books that I've ever read. So there are various ways that a writer can pull you in, through the power of her or his ideas, through the gripping story, through the polish of the writing. And I was looking for that because it is the written medium, you have to arrest the reader. And it doesn't help to have a good story unless you're going to command the attention of the reader. So I was looking for that. Did the writer have the capacity through the story or through the style or the narrative to really get your attention and to draw you into to what he or she is trying to say? I think the ones that really struck me profoundly were Fred Khumalo's Touch My Blood, which for me as a white person who grew up relatively poor, but with all the privileges of being a young white kid in the 1950s and 60s and a young white student in the 1970s, it really gave me an insight into what growing up slightly beyond that time in the 60s, late 60s and 70s was for a poor black kid. And I found it a witty, amusing, subtle, ironic, deft book. So I was deeply struck by that. The other book which blew me away was Ivan Vladislavich's Portrait with Keys, which for some reason, which is to my own demerit, I've never read Vladislavich's novels. And I'm certainly going to make a project of reading them in the rest of the year. At the moment, I've got to finish the long list. So I've got a handful of books still to read with that. But I was completely overwhelmed with the literary depth and the beauty and the subtlety of Vladislavich. It was a deeply impressive book, a book that was deeply respectful of Johannesburg, of our cosmopolitan city, of its multicultural facets, of the complexities and difficulties of living in the city. He talks about an intruder, encountering an intruder one day, and all the rage of the middle-class proprietor, but also all the complexities that come with that. The smell of an old book, it evokes the people who've read it, it evokes the places it's been stored, it evokes the hands that have handled it, it evokes the atmospheres it's been in. So all the sense of the history of that book and the engagement of the people with it who have read it, mustiness, freshness, personal odours, the odours of the hand and of the room it's been in, very wonderful. I think that the books really do reflect the complexity of our national psyche. There are a lot of books about, if you read Jacques Poe's Dances with Devils, for example, or Fred Khumalo's Touch My Blood, you cannot fail to be deeply touched by the implicit violence in so many of our social relationships in South Africa and indeed in the rest of Africa. At the same time, many of the books, to take the example I've already given, the biography of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, deal with the constructive response to a society's pathology. How do you respond to a continent that has been ravaged for centuries by colonialism, by imperialism, by slavery, by stripping of its natural resources? And many of the books reflect that. They reflect an engaged and constructive response with the pathology of our continent and of our society. And I found that very deeply hopeful.